All right, it's good to be back. Apologize last week. Probably had some sort of stomach bug, whatever it was. But again, good to be back. We are holding by deriving the Noahide laws. This is part 3. We spoke a few weeks back about dining, about the laws of setting up law courts and all that. Where it's derived from. So we saw also that by the 7 categories, there are positive, negative commands. And here, we're going to look at the commandments of blasphemy and idolatry. See where they're learned out from. Again, we're going to go into much greater detail, as we go through. So let's start with, we're going to start with blasphemy. And blasphemy, right, a little bit hard, to define, right? In English, right, it seems like lack of a better words, right? We're going to use blasphemy, but it's really, I would say it's a bad, I don't think it's a good translation. Definitely not a good translation, but that's how it's normally translated, right? Normally, we'll say blasphemy, heresy, right, sort of being, interchangeable. But also we use blasphemy to mean taking God's name in vain. But if we look at the verse itself, which we're going to see, then neither of these really convey the intent over here of what the actual prohibition is. Right? We always say that you got to be careful of translation. Certainly a bad translation, mistranslation, right? But translation, is not foolproof. Definitely not foolproof, right? But sometimes we translate things, and it's very hard, right? Very hard to translate it in, into English, other languages, right? What's the definition over here? The prohibition of blasphemy is found in Leviticus chapter 24, verses 15 to 16. And it says, any man who curses, right? The word for curse is yakalel, kuf lamed lamed. Anyone interested in grammar? Means to curse, right? Modern Hebrew means to curse. And one who is nokeh, the name of God shall be put to death, right? Nokeh, we're gonna have to see, exactly what, exactly what that means. It's a little bit of a strange word, to use for blasphemy over here. So when the Torah mentions sin, it uses the word yikalel, as we mentioned. Now the word yikalel, kuf lamed lamed, and Hebrew grammarian, kuf lamed lamed, what does it mean? It means to curse. Right? That's pretty clear. Usually means to curse. And it's often used in that connection, right, with this transgression. Right? Cursing seemingly using God's name. But in verse 16, what does the Torah use? The Torah uses the word nokeh. Now the word nokeh is a little bit strange. Right? A little bit strange over here. The Mishnah in Sanhedrin, where a lot of these laws are derived, explains what does the word nokeh mean. It means it's referring to cursing God. But it's using a divine name. Using God's own divine name in the formula. Now, the reason why it's hard to translate, because how is it used? It's used, may X curse or smite X. That's what the word nokeh is coming to teach you. May Shimon curse Levi, or smite Levi, or whatever the case is. Now, if a person does that using God's own divine name, that's the definition of blasphemy. Kind of strange. No one would have thought of such a thing, right, in general. And if someone does such a thing, that's liable for death penalty. Comes on the Gemara in Sanhedrin 56a tells me the scope of the prohibition. Right? It's not just God's own divine name. It means all divine names. Or even appellation. for God's divine attributes. Right? It could be any one of God's attributes as well that comes underneath this category. So there are numerous other prohibitions included under the umbrella of blasphemy. What do they include? Don't desecrate, don't destroy, don't erase God's name. Using God's name inappropriately. Don't use God's name, right, in vain. Don't use it inappropriately. Don't just go pronouncing God's name for no reason. So now we mentioned before that the Noahide laws are enumerated according to their negative aspects. Don't do this, don't do that. Also positive aspects. You shall do this, you shall do that. Right? There are negative and positive aspects over here. Comes along one of the great 20th century scholars, Rabbi Ruben Margolius, of blessed memory. So he had a commentary on Sanhedrin called Margolius Hayam. That's the name of his commentary. And he discusses a lot of the Noahide laws. So what does he say over there? He said it's pretty amazing. There's no mention of the 7 Noahide laws of this foremost principle. What's that? The fundamental of all fundamentals, belief in God. Is that obvious? How come there's no mention of God over here? Right? It's belief in God that's going to serve as the foundation of all mitzvahs, right? And all prohibitions. Certainly have to have that fundamental principle. And we mentioned before that the Rambam states clear to keep the Noahide laws, you have to keep it because God said so. And God passed it down to Moses. Right? Whether you made a declaration in front of a rabbinical court, you didn't make a declaration, right? That doesn't really mean so much. If you want to do it, you can do it. But the Rambam states clear. You have to say, I'm keeping the Noahide laws because God gave the Torah to Moshe. Moshe passed it down to us. So we would have thought the foundation of all foundations for keeping Torah mitzvahs is belief in God. So where is the mitzvah belief in God over here? Including the Noahide law. Right? It seems, says the Margolius Hayam over here, says Rabbi Ruben Margolius, he says it seems belief in God, right, it's subsumed in the category of blasphemy. In other words, I don't need a separate command, belief in God. Just as a side point, how do us Jews, how do we know there's a mitzvah to believe in God through knowledge? Exodus chapter 20, verse 1, right? Verse 2, I am the Lord your God. How do I know? How do I know I'm the Lord your God? Because I took you out of the house of bondage. Took you out of the house of Egypt. Right? And so we believe, Jews believe, God exists. God intervenes in history. Non-Jew doesn't have to believe it. I think it's a good thing for a non-Jew to believe in divine providence, but they don't have to. For Jews, that's pretty crucial. So belief in God according to c.Prayer, where he brings down all the mitzvahs according to the Parsha. And he says over there in Parshas Yisro, by belief in God, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, right? That's belief in God with knowledge. So there's an obvious question. Why do you tell me there's a mitzvah to believe in God for Jews? Because he took me out of Egypt. Why do you tell me very simple? He created the world. And a proof. Right? Isn't that better than saying he gave the Torah to the Jewish people? Sorry, he took out the Jews from Egypt. So the answer is nobody was there in creation that can testify that God did it. Who can testify that God took us out of Egypt? There were 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, not including women and children, about 3 million people. Make that claim. I'll make that claim on Mount Sinai. Now, seven Mishma, we will do, we will hear. Right? Doesn't matter what God says. We're going to keep what he said. But they were there. They were there. So, belief in God for us, right? We have to believe God is absolute. First, the Rambam's 13 principles of faith. We have to believe he exists. He's absolute. He doesn't change. And also, according to this, for us, God intervenes in history. Passover Seder. We tell over the story of coming out of Egypt. 4 generations at every Passover Seder. Father has an obligation, the Torah says, to give it over to his children. Right? Now, does a non-Jew have to believe in that? No. Is it a good thing for them to believe in it? Sure. But that's not the basis of fundamental belief. Right? So comes along Rabbi Margolius and he says, you know what the fundamental belief is? That God created the world, that God's in charge. You know, and all that. That he's unique in the world. Where does that come underneath the category of blasphemy? So the belief in God is required for Noahides, no question about it. They have to believe in God by many authorities. Right? It's really the fabric of the Noahide code. Right? Very simply because they have to believe in an absolute God. So the proposition, though, it falls under this category. Very surprising. Right? What would we have thought? It comes underneath, a totally different thing. Of course God exists. Of course I have to believe in God. It comes under blasphemy. Why would I think that? Wouldn't it make sense for believing God to be subsumed within the laws of idolatry? If you're not allowed to believe in idolatry, we're going to speak about. So therefore, de facto, that means I have to believe in one God. No multiple gods over here. That's forbidden. Comes along the Rav Lichtenstein in his book, The 7 Laws of Noah. He asks the same question. Right? He gives a very good answer. What's his answer? He says the laws against idolatry regulate man's relationship to the physical world. Keeping this world's meaning and value and perspective. Because God, he's in charge. Right? He's unique. The laws against blasphemy. What do they define? The nature and boundaries of man's relationship with his creator. Therefore, belief in God and all other elements of this man-God interaction makes sense. It comes under blasphemy. But you have to ask the question, why? Why would it come under this? Come sort of in a backward way. Now, prayer also follows this rule. Shouldn't therefore be included under blasphemy. Right? Because if we're going to have this element of God-man interaction, and it comes under blasphemy, so what about prayer? Prayer, same thing. We interact with God. We praise Him. We thank Him for everything He gives us. We praise Him for those great rings around Saturn. And He gives us snow and rain and all these things. However, big question. Is there an obligation for Noahides to pray? Comes along the Ran from Nisan Gaon, and he explains the following. He says not all the 7 laws and their derivations require absolute revelation. In other words, it doesn't have to necessarily be so explicit. For example, obligation to recognize God, to obey Him, to serve Him. Doesn't that make rational sense? It can be logically derived. Who do we see proof from that? Abraham. But at the age of 3, the age of 40, right? Depends, who you hold like. But he saw there's a world of design. He came to that conclusion. There's a world of design. I have to serve the designer. Makes perfect sense. Same thing over here. Just because it's obvious who says, Torah has to tell me explicitly. Now, the Hebrew term used by Rabbi Nisan Gaon for serving God is what? It's the Avdo. Right? Evet, to serve. What does it refer to? Prayer. The mitzvah of prayer for Noahides, implied by Isaiah chapter 56, verse 7. My house shall be called the house of prayer for all people. Makes sense? For everybody. Right? Non-Jews included. Now, Rashi notes, when it says house for all people, not just for the Jewish people. Comes along, Rabbi Shmuel ben Chofni, also wrote a whole list of Noahide laws and explains them. And we explained before, prayer is an obligation, as many later authorities say, for non-Jews. Now, the structure of prayer, we're going to speak about. But the obligation to pray, everyone would agree. Right? Most people would agree. Even those few later authorities don't agree. That's an actual obligation, but it's a moral imperative. Right? It's a good thing for Noahides to pray, and they're rewarded for it. Why shouldn't they pray? What they should pray, again, is a whole discussion. What's the problem? They're giving credibility to the one above. They're thanking him for what we have, saying psalms and other things. Well, what's the problem? Not an issue. Again, say exactly the same things you say, okay? Right? But it's certainly proper. So even if they say, well, if they have an obligation, they could say, okay, it's not forbidden. It'd be a moral imperative. Now, the study of Torah being intrinsic to the man-God relationship, pretty clear. Non-Jews also have to study Torah for what they need to do, for what they need to understand. It's also included under blasphemy. Right, as we saw, at the end of a couple weeks ago. So therefore, the extension is a mitzvah to honor Torah in Torah scholars. Not just enough to study. Right? That the Talmud says, calls Babylonians fools. Said, you stupid Babylonians. You stand up when the Torah scroll is taken out. You give the Torah scroll honor. By people that live the Torah, that keep its mitzvahs at a high level, those people you don't stand up for. They represent Torah. If you have an obligation to stand up when the Torah is taken out, why don't you stand up for Torah scholars when they walk into a room? So over here, what are we saying? It's an extension. Right? Since we're talking about the man-God relationship included under this rubric of blasphemy, so same thing, we can extend that to say, so you want to honor Torah. In honor of Torah scholars. So that's the idea of blasphemy. Right? Now, as we always mention, we never would come up with such an idea. Right? When it comes to belief in God, keeping what he says, don't you think should be explicit? Right? It seems like we're learning in a little bit of a sidestep way. That's the way it seems. Right? But according to the way we explain, from Nissen Gaon and others, right, it makes perfect sense. Right? It makes perfect sense. Why? Why these things come underneath this category. Right? So that is category of blasphemy. Now, favorite, I'm sure, by a lot of people, idolatry. Right? We're going to go into more practical definitions later. Right? And what applies and what doesn't apply and all that. But the prohibition of idolatry, there are many nuanced details, a lot of details. Explain the distinction between idolatrous thoughts and idolatrous deeds. So the person should say, well, the Devarim Shalev ain't no Devarim. Words in my heart don't mean anything. Why don't they mean anything? Because they're thoughts. The only reason a person is obligating anything is because they do something. They say something. Who cares what I think in general? We're going to see. There's a difference between idolatrous thoughts and actions. They're prohibited in different ways. There are certain things by idolatry, by immorality, that a person may be punished even by their thoughts, even if they do not act on them. Right? The very few things that a person can be punished for not acting. Idolatry is one of them, which we're going to see. Now, the exact details involved in pinning down idolatrous thoughts versus deeds, we're going to cover it. Right? We'll go through it step by step. We're not going to get through it today. Right? We're going to cover it. Not only that, Maimonides says, right, as Rambam tells us, any act of idol worship that is a capital offense for Jews, likewise capital offense for Noah. We don't make any distinction. Right? Capital offense for Jews, capital offense for non-Jews. So there's similarities between Jews and Noah regarding idolatry. Now, why do we say in general? Because there are a few exceptions. One of these differences, most people probably have heard of, is an issue of what we call c.Shituf. What is c.Shituf? It's the belief in some other false deity, in addition to believing in one true God. Right? There's a lot written on this. Tremendous amount. We're going to try and sort of cut to the chase, so to speak. But essentially, c.Shituf is, I believe in God. I believe in one true God, but I believe there are also other false deities. I give credibility to the sun as a false deity. It's got power, but that power is only enacted by God. It can't act on his own. Right? Or wind, or fire, or other things. Now, c.Shituf, prohibited belief for Jews. No question about it, forbidden for Jews. Question is, by Noahides, there's a lot of confusion. Seems to be a lot of confusion. Comes along the Rambam. The Rambam, in a few places, right, and other authorities as well, later authorities as well. What do they say? They say that c.Shituf is outright idolatry even for none. Let's make clear, there are a number of rabbinical authorities. You got the Rambam, the Noda Yehuda, the Sha'ar Ephraim, the Pri Megadim, the Shulchan Sofer. A lot of later commentaries hold that c.Shituf 100% idolatry for none. Idolatry for none. Right? But there are others, early commentators, that disagree. Right? They disagree. And they discuss a section of the Talmud that discusses the Gentiles are allowed to swear oaths in the name of God or other deities. Does that make it forbidden? In other words, they swear in the name of God or some other false god, let's say, whether they're liable or not. Now, what's the implication? The implication is that they're allowed to. That c.Shituf is not a prohibition for none. Right? And the majority of later authorities, right, you have the Darkei Moshe, the Shulchan Aruch, the Yeshiva, you have many others, hold that it is permitted for non-Jews. So what do we see before we get into the distinction? We see clear there's a major difference of opinion between some of the early commentators, later commentators, whether c.Shituf is forbidden or not to non-Jews. However, when these authorities, these rabbinic authorities say that it is permitted, they are under very specific conditions. Right? There are a few conditions there. First of all, that the Torah holds non-Jewish belief in another God, in addition to the true God, to be mistaken. Right? Meaning, it's not necessarily forbidden, but it's not good. But one who does so is not viewed as a sinner, and is not considered mechassidei umos ha'olam, not considered the righteous of the non-Jews. Right? They will not receive his full rewards for observing the Noahide law. Now, they could be mistaken, even though it's not really a prohibition. They're not really considered a sinner. It's not good. They won't get full reward here. That's one thing. Second thing is, c.Shituf pertains only to belief in a secondary divine being. Meaning, they don't worship the secondary God. They throw him in. They throw him in as as an afterthought. But they don't really believe he does that much. Right? They're not worshiping him as the number one God. So any expression of worship for this secondary deity is prohibited as idolatrous practice. Doesn't matter. Right? Right? They believe in a secondary God. They're not worshiping them as the main God, but it's still idolatry. Right? That's the second thing. The third thing over here is It's only the belief in another God, in addition to the true God, that is not punishable. In other words, if you take the true God with another entity, or the assigning of corporality, right, giving it, giving God, the ability to do things like man, right, create issues of actual idolatry. That may be a major issue. So the Torah definition of idolatry, not necessarily limited to the worship of idols, but it pertains to how we look at or represent the nature of one true God. In other words, you could have, another deity that you believe in, but you don't worship, so not the end of the world, but you don't get as much merit. Right? You don't get as much merit. So the question is how far it goes. So you tell me, okay, there's a major difference of opinion among the commentators whether it is or whether it isn't. Whether c.Shituf is idolatry or not. Right? That's true, but you have to look at how they're using it. Right? How they're using this quote-unquote secondary God. Now, where does this come up? The majority of the time, people speak about c.Shituf. It comes up with Christianity. Right? So many try to qualify Christianity as an acceptable belief for non-Jews, using the concept of c.Shituf. Right? Now, this is very hard to say. We're going to see why. Right? Many authorities make clear, let's make no mistake, many rabbinical authorities hold Christianity is acceptable for non-Jews, but you have to understand the context. Okay? The vast majority of authorities we're going to see hold it is idolatry. Right? But the question is, if you don't hold it's idolatry, why not? Right? What's the issue? Now, Christianity in general, a little bit hard to determine over here. There's many, many thousands of pages written on this. So even to try and do it justice, we're not going to do it justice. Certainly not, as part of this course. We're going to really give you the short version. And that is, Christianity has many elements that are 100% clearly nothing to talk about. It's idolatry from a Torah perspective. There's rituals, modes of worship, but some are a little bit difficult to pin down. The question is it monotheistic? Is it polytheistic? Right? God, Son, the Holy Ghost is always really the one thing. Is it different aspects of the same thing? Maybe it's not really idolatry. Right? Maybe, it's the same aspect of, the same thing, whatever. So it's difficult to classify. Right? It's not so simple. Sardic rabbis living in Muslim-ruled lands, they didn't have any issue over it. They ruled very stringently. They had power. They criticized Christian belief 100%. Nothing to talk about idolatry. Outright idolatry. But rabbis living in Christian lands, they had to be careful. They had to be cautious because the church was always looking over them. Constant threat of exile, death. That's why the Talmud was censored. They weren't free to say whatever they wanted, so to speak. So they weren't free to classify idolatry as outright idolatry. So now they're in a certain precarious situation because they can't say what they want. Right? Even if what they believe is true and they don't disagree that it's idolatry, you can't say it's idolatry, they'll kill you. Right? They'll burn down your house, kill your family, send you in exile, all that. So now, in the rabbis' theological writing, they often declare Christian belief c.Shituf, and therefore acceptable for a non-Jew. In theory, let's make clear, right? In theological writing, Jewish philosophy in the vernacular. However, in their writings on Jewish law, they held that Christian ritual worship 100% idolatry. Right? The Ramah rules crosses which a non-Jew is bowed down to prohibited. Right? They're idolatrous images. Right? So, according to that, he held that the Trinity is idolatry. Right? But if they would bow down to that cross, then that's idolatry. So the difference in Torah law, the difference in philosophy. They're often able to get these halachic views past censors because legal writing's not thoroughly vetted. Right? The church censors usually lack sufficient understanding, which makes sense. They don't understand Aramaic. They can't read Hebrew. Right? So Jewish law got passed through. They didn't have any issues. Very few issues. Jewish philosophy, a different ballgame. So, if it was not for the threat of the church, these Ashkenazi rabbis very well would have said the exact same thing as the Sephardic rabbis. 100% Christianity is idolatry. But even if Christian belief is b.Shituf, the practice of Christianity doesn't change. That's idolatry. Right? Because, and in the end, that's how we look at it. Right? We look at Christianity 100%, as idolatry. Not that the worship of another secondary deity. Right? It's an idolatrous concept of God himself. That's what they're saying. Right? The idea that God ever took on, a bodily form, and a mother, was born. Right? That's absolutely heretical. Right? God has no body, no form. The Torah uses anthropomorphism to say God's got an outstretched arm, got a big hand, these different things. Fine. That doesn't mean, it's an anthropomorphism. That doesn't mean God has a body. It doesn't mean, he had a father and a mother and who knows what else. Not at all. That is idolatry. That's heresy. Right? 100%. Right? So therefore, we look at Christianity, right? It's idolatry for Noahide, both in belief and in practice. Even though Christians themselves don't necessarily have the full status of idolaters, whatever, again, it's complicated. So now, $1 billion question, that's good about Christianity. What about Islam? Now, most believe Islam is not idolatry. It has a strong theological resonance with Torah thought and belief. Right? Belief in one God. Right? That definitely seems to be the case. And we also know a Jew or a non-Jew cannot enter a church. Because it's a place of idolatry. Right? But others say you can pray in a mosque. Why can you pray in a mosque? Because it's not idolatry. There's a Muslim contemporary, the Rambam, that records that the Rambam would occasionally pray in a mosque. Right? Obviously not ideal. Only under certain circumstances. But one recent authority holds better for Jews to pray in an airport mosque than pray, amongst everybody else. Having proper intention and all that. I mean, it's not ideal, right? But it's pretty clear, according to most, that it is, it's not idolatry. It's 100% monotheistic and an acceptable belief system. There are many customs that are certainly problematic, etc. But, there are issues with Islam, no question about it. Some want to say, and we're going to see as we go on, some want to say de facto, Islam is really Noahidism, or Noism. I don't believe that's true. We're going to see through this course, because if there's anything that applies to Noahides that would not apply in Islam, then obviously it's not true. That would not be true. But then we're going to have to see. That 100% we're going to have to see. So, but Islam's a different issue. Even though it might not be idolatry, there's another issue. Jews and non-Jews are enjoined against creation of new religion. Right? As the Rambam brings down. In other words, you create a new religion by default, you reject belief in the Torah. In the truth of the Torah. In the truth of Moshe, greatest prophet in history, and in God's authority. Right? So, the Torah containing both the Noahide laws and Jewish laws are forever. Right? In the Torah states this no less than 24 times. So what's the problem? The problem is that if you want to tell me that it's not idolatrous, it's a new religion. But this new religion rejects the Torah. Rejects Christianity also, but rejects Torah. So new religions denying the eternal authority of Torah, we don't give them any legitimacy. Right? We give them zero legitimacy. And this would apply to Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, or any of the other 80,000 so-called religions that exist in the world. Once they deny the authority of the Torah, they're not legit. Totally not legit. Right? So, and it applies to any religion coming after the Torah. Regardless whether these religions observe all or part of the Noahide law, it doesn't matter. Making up their own new religion, they're rejecting Torah, and by rejecting Torah, we don't give them any legitimacy. None. Maybe there's some things in there that may be true, okay? So what? There's a little bit of truth in everything. Doesn't mean the whole thing is true. All you have to do is find the flaw. Right? Find the flaw in the Quran, find the flaw in the New Testament, then you know it's not true. Same thing, God forbid, the Torah. You found the flaw in the Torah. Same thing, we wouldn't keep any of it. Why would we? Right? You can't find any mistakes. But this is a huge mistake. You're rejecting the authenticity of the Torah. You can't do that. In the same vein, neither a Noahide nor a Jew can also alter the religion set forth by him in the Torah. Right? Can't change it. Can't add, can't subtract. After rejection of Torah, that's Torah made up my own mind. So that knocks out Reform Jews, conservative Jews, modern Orthodox, if that's what they do, or open Orthodox, Reconstructionists, whatever you want to call them. They're creating de facto a false religion, right? Or quote unquote a new religion. It's also forbidden, even for Jews. A Noahide, for example, may not observe holy days not commanded to him. And we're going to see this in depth. Can't keep Shabbos. Can't keep Passover. Those commands are only to the Jewish people. The Rambam says. Don't apply. Similarly, mezuzah and tefillin, symbols commanded only to Jews, not to Noah. Guys, the Rabbah's comment on the Rambam, they have special holiness, do not apply to non-Jews. Period. They don't apply. They're only commanded to Jews. To observe them would constitute to create a new religion. That's what some people are doing. I have the right to do this. I have the right to do that. Well, you don't have the right to do anything. You do what the Torah tells you. You do it, you do what the rabbis tell us. You're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to do it. Don't go making up your own religion. That's what people do. Or some people do. However, Noahides may observe any commandment given to Jews under certain conditions. Right? What's the condition? Right? What's the condition? Has a logical reason behind it. Universal. Makes logical sense. Or is a positive benefit to the person or society. Right? So if the intent is not doing that, right, you're doing it solely because it believes it's a religious commandment. Right? If that was his underlying reason, you're in error. You're making a big mistake. So the commandment is only for the Jews, not for Noah. So either it's going to be logical, or that's a positive benefit. The foremost authority of Jewish law in the 20th century, Moshe Feinstein, in America, blessed memory, emphatically wrote that a Noahide who decides to keep Torah commandments intended only for Jews. Right? Let's understand. What does he say? They receive no reward. They receive no blessing for his actions. It's not me talking. This is the foremost rabbinic scholar of the last century. You transgress by creating a new religion. Let's repeat that. You get no rewards, no blessing, and you transgress the fundamental principle of creating a new religion. Now, this does not necessarily preclude Noahide observance of any other mitzvahs of the Torah. we're going to have to see. We're going to have to see what applies, what doesn't apply. But there are many things that don't apply. And if they don't apply, they transgress this idea of creating a new religion. Right? So the point over here is you're going to stay a non-Jew, you're not going to straddle the lines. You're not going to be this super non-Jew. Forget it. We're going to discuss in depth what they're allowed to do, not allowed to do. So, what do we see? One cannot be a Christian Noahide. Very simple, Christianity. But idolatry. Right? Both belief and practice. Can't be a Muslim Noahide. Why not? Islam, new post-Torah religion. Denies the eternality of Torah. Right? Denies the Torah is eternal. You can't even be a Jewish Noahide. Right? That's contradictory in terms. Right? Give me a Jewish Noahide. It's not a way for non-Jews to participate in Jewish ritual or religion. That doesn't work. Stay as a non-Jew. You're not Judaizing Judaism for non-Jews. That's not it. You got to be non-Jews according to God's will. That's what you have to do. Right? You can't, and if you don't do that, and you start straddling the line, and start saying, oh, I can keep Shabbos, I can keep other things, you start doing other things, what happens? You're making up your own religion. You're Judaizing Noahs. That's what you're doing. Right? What applies can apply. What doesn't apply doesn't apply. We'll see. There are going to be, a lot of things that people can do. And there are plenty of things that people can't do. You have to know. You have to know. You have to see what categories they come under and how we understand it and all that. So we're going to see, I guess, the next lesson, right? We're going to, continue to overview these 7 categories where they're learned out. Right? But, idolatry is pretty big. Right? Big misconception, as we mentioned. It's this idea of c.Shituf. Right? This idea of c.Shituf and how it applies to Christianity or it doesn't. Right? 100%. Again, we're going to go into more detail of all these laws. We're going to categorize them and all that, but in general, just how you learn out the laws. As well. Yeah. Any questions? Someone asks, is there an obligation to stand up for an elderly father? Yeah. Right? Father, grandfather. Right, as well. But non-Jews, have to see if it applies under the category of blasphemy. Right? If it's going to apply, then yeah. It'll apply to a father. It'll apply to a grandfather. Doesn't matter whether they're rabbinic scholar or not. If they're older, an obligation to honor them. Right? And that would come underneath that category. So underneath that category of, blasphemy. But it doesn't mean that they have to honor, they have to fear and honor, their parents just like Jews. Right? There will be distinctions. We're going to see. Right? There will be distinctions. But yeah, according to this blasphemy, they'd have no obligation. Right? According to this, they'd have an obligation if it would apply to stand up for father, grandfather, etc. Any other questions about anything we spoke about today? Any questions on any of that? Any general questions? Either general questions about Noahides, in general, or take any questions, whatever, take any general questions. Let's see my questions coming in here. Maybe not. the Torah points out, it certainly helps. The Torah Shem speaks for everyone Jews in Noahide. The problem we've mentioned, we mentioned a number of times, we'll probably mention it maybe ad nauseum, is that people do not know the laws properly. And there are people out there teaching the laws not properly. Right? And that's the whole point of the course, is that people should understand, what the laws are, the clarity. They should have the clarity. And hopefully they should be able to give over to others. Right? But, there's a big mess out there. Big, I mean big. It's whatever. Sometimes the blind leading the blind, so to speak. So getting, this is very good information. Doesn't, necessarily need to agree with it, but, people deserve clarity. I don't think there's any question. It's interesting. There are, we mentioned, there are 30 places. Let me just find it here. Yeah, there are 30 places, where it mentions that it's eternal. In number 28, footnote number 28, where it mentions all these different places. I mentioned in all my classes on the Torah, over the book of Leviticus chapter 15, anytime it says forever, I always emphasize the point. Forever means forever. Doesn't mean the Torah changed. Certain things may not apply because we messed it up. Right? But it doesn't mean the Torah changed. It doesn't mean, it's only for a certain amount of time. It's only for that generation. Not true. Totally not true. Right? The Torah mentions many times, and we mentioned 30. Right? 30 different places where the Torah says it's forever. Right? And that's how it's translated. Even by King James himself. Right? It says forever. Right? So, you think he's Christian, you say, okay, so what does forever mean? Not only means that generation. What are you giving me? Webster's fifth definition? Come on. If it says forever, can't we be like the Karaites? Forget about oral law. Can't we say it means forever? Forever means forever. So why don't certain things apply? Oh, you have to understand why. That's a different issue. But to say, forever doesn't mean forever. Then what does it mean? I'm not saying you can't ask the question why certain things don't apply. There are many things that don't apply because we messed it up. Not because it's not forever. Right? But we ourselves messed it up. Okay? It makes perfect sense. But, there'll be people, I remember, studying by the conservative movement, that was one of their claims. See? We're not slavery today. We have other things today. See? It's not for all generations. Right? That was one of their claims. One of their bogus claims. Right? If we were to do what we were supposed to do, wouldn't we be giving sacrifices today? Wouldn't there be a temple in Jerusalem today? There would be. A lot of the laws that apply in the land would apply. But that's not the case because we didn't do what we're supposed to do. Totally didn't do what we're supposed to do. That doesn't mean the Torah is not eternal because certain things don't work today because we messed it up. It's not logical. Right? That doesn't make any sense. Who cares if we messed it up? Right? And the fact is that we did. So if that's true, then certain things won't apply. Certain things don't have the same power. And why don't they have the same power? Because we're the ones who messed it up. That doesn't mean it's not eternal. Right? That's the wrong conclusion. It certainly doesn't mean that. But people can extrapolate from what they want. People can make their own mistakes based on their own agenda. Harold Kushner wrote a book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, sold millions. Made everybody feel good. About, say stuff happens. He had a son, died of progeria, terrible disease. A 10-year-old in the body of an 80-year-old. He's like, I check my actions, my wife, we're pretty good people. We're not so bad. It must be that God checked out and was my bad look. right? We made a lot of people feel good that we're not responsible for our actions. But obviously there's something else going on, right? A child gets a disease. It's not his fault. It's not a punishment. He's not liable for punishment. That's to the age of 13 or 20. If he's not liable for punishment, there has to be something going on with the soul. But even without that, I say, okay, I understand you went through a difficult time. What do you do at the end of the book of Job? What do you do at the end of the book of Job? The end of the book of Job says, God, were you there when I was playing with the Leviathan? No. Were you there when I was saving these animals and they should have died? No. Were you there for that? No, no, no. So if that's the case, what are you arguing with me? You have control over everything. You have zero control. You ever read the book of Job? I don't know. But that's the conclusion. Nobody wants to go through such a thing. Right? I don't think there's any question. But at the end of the day, isn't that the conclusion of the book of Job? That's the conclusion. Go read it. That's 2 or 3 chapters. But he had an agenda. He wanted to make people feel good. He wanted to make people feel that there's no repercussions for anything like this. No repercussions for your soul, no repercussions for nothing. Well, that's great. That made a whole generation of people feel good. That means it doesn't matter what I do. Doesn't mean there are any repercussions. Very good. Right? It's called pass the buck in the vernacular. Right? Might as well be a Christian. Believe in JC. I'm saved forever. Beautiful. Do I have to do anything? No. I'll go confess. Say a few Hail Mary. Everything's good. No problem. That's called pass the buck. That's not called taking responsibility. Not at all. So, again, someone who goes to such a terrible thing, it's a terrible thing. No question. It's tragedy. It's an absolute tragedy. Things do not happen haphazardly. There's nothing that's random. Everything is measured for measure. Whether we understand it, we don't, doesn't matter. Everything is measured for measure in God's eyes. So if that's the case, do we really understand what's going on in the world? Not at all. Not at all. If God would open our eyes for a split second, we saw how things, go in the world and what he does, we'd be blind. We wouldn't understand. It'd be unbelievable. We don't understand anything. Nothing. We have to put our best foot forward. We have to work on our emunah, our belief in God, and how the world runs and all that. True. But to say, well, the world is haphazard, nothing really matters. I wear a t-shirt that says stuff happens. Okay. How's that help? That's called pass the buck. That's what it is. It's called pass the buck. It's all about taking God out of the picture. I know what God wants. I don't know what he wants. But at the end of the day, what do? People want to feel good. Oh, there's no right and wrong. My bad luck, this happened, whatever. You're not in control of anything. If a person sat down to eat a meal, give one example. A person sits down and nice steak, potatoes, vegetables, they'll have a drink, they'll have dessert. So now you pinpoint and tell me, okay, so when are you going to go to the bathroom? When's it all going to go out of your system? You pinpoint it to the exact second. You can't. You're not in control of what your body's going to do. Not at all. We're not in control of our body. Is there anything we control? Very little. Very little. But if a person is saying, I'm not such a bad person, it must be, God's not in charge. That's heresy. 100% that's heresy. Do we fathom God's ways? No. Age-old question, why the righteous suffer? It's an age-old question. But at the end of the day, God runs the world. And that's what we believe. It's all about life being fair and not fair. It has nothing to do with anything. I'm given a certain hand. Do we have a choice who our parents are? No. Siblings? No. Mission Perkei Avos says in Ethics of Our Fathers, we're born against our will, we die against our will. In parentheses, I would say you still have to live. But are we in control? No. There's so many things we're not in control. The question is how we react. That's all it is. So if someone to say, I know better, I understand how the world works. You're an infinitesimally small speck of cosmic dust. You live in a small town, in the city, in the state, the country, on a continent, on a planet, in a galaxy. We're getting smaller. We think the world revolves around us. Okay, we have to put our best foot forward 100%. But at the end of the day, we're in control. Not in control of anything. Very little. But have someone say, my bad luck, everything's haphazard. Look at the world in general. Look at the fact you take an apple seed, you plant it in the ground. Sunlight, water, it's going to grow a tree with hundreds of apples. Why? Because that's nature. Think, that's the DNA of an apple seed. Very good. Where'd it come from? Came from an apple seed. Where'd it come from? That's nature. Where'd nature come from? Right? That's why people don't like to have these type of conversations. You're going to say, well, is nature God? Is God in control? Is he not in control? Right? These things are absolutely miraculous. Look at the human body. Look at the human body. The miracles of the human body. Unbelievable. One little thing goes out of whack, the whole body's out of whack. Isn't that a world of design? Like we said by Abraham, world of design. Must be a designer. You gotta serve that designer. No, it's not haphazard. There are a lot of things that look kind of haphazard, but there are a lot of things that look like design. Nobody's any question. There's no question about it. You can argue. You can say, well, that's nature. Okay, but then you have to say, so why does nature stay the way it does? Why does the Earth stay on the same axis? Doesn't get closer to the sun or further away? They tell me it's gravitational pull, it's this and that. But think about it. This big ball. This big ball in the sky gets a little bit closer to the sun, we get incinerated. A little bit further back, we're like Pluto. That frozen tundra, even though Pluto got demoted as a planet. Okay, no offense. But the fact you're telling me, okay, it's science and how the Earth goes on its axis, but it's in its gravitational pull and it's all very good. Why does it stay that way? It's saying, bang, this happened, whatever, and it stayed that way and it'll be that way fast. Isn't that an interesting coincidence? What are the odds of something like that happening? Maybe some big meteorite's going to hit the Earth and knock it off its axis, spiral into hyperspace, who knows what, get too close to the sun, we're all dead. Couldn't that happen in theory? There are things could happen. The way things set up, doesn't it show there is some level of design? It shows that. People can deny it. People can certainly deny it. But, I think it's pretty obvious. Yeah, anyone have any other questions? Someone asked about a book about conquering, subjugating, and harnessing the evil inclination. I don't know if I mentioned that. Trying to think, conquering. I can't think of offhand. There's a lot of good Muslim books, but not offhand something that speaks about that. I have to think about that because I can't think offhand what what you're referring to. There is a book, and maybe you're referring to Deriving, the way of God, that talks about where the evil inclination came from, and spiritual forces and all that. Could be that's what what you're referring to. Yeah, it's called Deriving, the way of God, by Rabbi Chaim Coffman, which I did give for Noahide Nations. I did 33 classes, 66 hours. Went through beginning to end. Very, very powerful book. Very, very powerful book. Not an easy book to go through. Very worthwhile. No question. I would say, whatever English translation you have, you read it once very quickly, and then you sit on it. It's hard. It's not an easy book to go through. A lot of it is, a lot of it's Kabbalah, which, when I gave the class, I didn't go to the Kabbalistic aspect so much. I just, gave simple explanations, brought it down, to this world. But yeah, it's a game changer. It's a game changer. Yeah, that's the name. Usato, right? That's the last name. Yeah, very, very good book. I would definitely recommend. I recommend, my own class on it as well. So, yeah, it's good. I did it, what do you call it? 33 classes, about 2 hours a shot. Yeah, it was whatever. Very thorough class. Very, very thorough. Yeah, any other questions? All right, so no other questions. I'm going to sign out. We'll continue with this extrapolating Noahide laws next week. If anyone has any questions, you can send me an email, Rabbi Chaim Coffman at gmail.com. Find me on Facebook, Michael Chaim Coffman, or the Unorthodox Conversion Judaism. Otherwise, I'm going to sign out. We're everyone a good middle of the day, almost end of the day for me, and everyone have a great